Sex trafficking is the exploitation of a person within national or across international borders for purposes of forced sex work. Adult women make up the largest groups of sex trafficking victims. Many of the poorest and most unstable communities have the highest incident rates. Trafficking has a distressing effect on mental, emotional, and physical well-being of the women entrenched in the cycle of sex trafficking.
International demographics. Human trafficking is a fast-growing problem in our world. 10 to 30 million modern-day slaves exist. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal industry, generating over about $30 billion. Sexual exploitation is the most identified form of human trafficking. About 161 countries are affected by some form of human trafficking. 80% of victims are women and girls. 50% of victims are minors. U.S. demographics. It is hard to get the exact number of people who are trafficked into the United States. The estimate is between 14 to 18,000 people are trafficked into the United States each year. Victims come from many different countries. The top 5 countries that victims come from to the United States are Thailand, Mexico, the Philippines, Haiti, and India. Over half of the victims are women. Georgia demographics. In the year 2012, there were 446 calls from Georgia that were made to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, and 109 of them were considered high risk. About 374 girls are exploited each month in the state of Georgia. In Georgia, about 12,400 men pay for sex from young women. In Atlanta, the website Craigslist is the most efficient medium for the marketing of the victims. Atlanta has the highest number of Latinos that are trafficked.
The cause of sex trafficking varies from one culture to another. For example, some women living in impoverished countries of Africa and Asia are forced or sold into sex trafficking by family members for income. Some women were sold into sex trafficking as children by their family, not just for money, but also in hopes that their child would escape the chronic poverty and would have a better life with more opportunities. Common factors across all cultures include poverty, oppression, lack of human rights, lack of social or economic opportunities, as well as political instabilities. The devaluation of women and girls in society makes them disproportionately vulnerable for trafficking.
In our textbook, Roger explains that young adults are learning to sacrifice in their relationships without losing a sense of identity. However, others may experience difficulties in maintaining a stable sense of self when they are involved in close relationships. These problems may lead to issues of self-identity, healthy boundaries, and relationship skills. Such a person could be more vulnerable to sex trafficking, though. Ryan Dalton is a co-founder of Rescue Forensics, a nonprofit company that helps law enforcement collect and document online evidence to prosecute traffickers in court. He states, "It's almost never an abduction. It's not like that Liam Neeson movie Taken, which is what a lot of people think of. It's an abuse of love or trust. It's a deep psychological manipulation. Traffickers will seek out women with low self-esteem and then shower them with attention, money, or care. They'll groom this person over time until they become compliant and have sex in order to receive affection. A trauma bond is created."
Exposure to traumatic events can alter neural pathways in the brain that affect emotion, cognitive, behavior, and attachment. The trauma theory helps to understand how trauma affects people develop connectedness, healthy relationships, and strong attachments to others and their communities.
The Polaris Project warns that sex traffickers may lure victims with false promises of high-paying jobs or fake affections. The victims may be offered gifts, compliments, sexual and physical intimacy, while they are promised fast money, future luxuries, and a better life. The trafficker eventually employs a variety of control tactics, including physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, confiscation of identification and money, isolation from friends and family, and even renaming the victims. The World Health Organization explains that the psychological damage to victims of sex trafficking can be devastating. Poor mental health is a dominant and persistent adverse health effect, and consequences can include depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, as well as thoughts of suicide. Forced or coerced use of drugs and alcohol is frequent in sex trafficking. Drugs and alcohol may also be used as a means to control individuals or as a coping method by the victim. Imposed social isolation, such as prevention of family contact or restriction of a person's movements, is used to maintain power over people in trafficking situations. America's Daughters was a poem written by a survivor of sex trafficking. An excerpt explains the psychological implications. Quote, "When you don't know yourself and you don't love yourself, you will fall for anything that sounds like love and feels like love." End quote. Polaris states that the needs of survivors are among the most complex of crime victims, often requiring a multidisciplinary approach to address severe trauma, medical needs, immigration, legal issues, safety concerns, shelter, basic needs, and financial hardship.
Victims of sex trafficking are sold multiple times a day to different pimps. In addition to living in unsanitary and crowded living conditions, they are malnourished. This creates a range of health risks such as scabies, tuberculosis, hepatitis, and communicable diseases. Other health issues seen in trafficking victims include sexually transmitted diseases, pelvic pain, rectal trauma, urinary difficulties, infertility, and unwanted pregnancies, as well as chronic back, hearing, cardiovascular, and respiratory problems, not to mention undetected and untreated diseases such as diabetes and cancer. Living consistently in fear of being captive in a country without language skills, consistent threats to oneself and one's family should they escape creates feelings of isolation, lack of control of their own life, self-blame, loss of appetite, lack of energy, dreams and nightmares, insomnia, anxiety, as well as depression. They also tend to have weaker eyesight over time due to working in dimly lighted environments.
Ethics is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as the moral principles that govern a person's or a group's behavior. Sex trafficking is obviously illegal. The FBI states, "It is sad but true, here in this country people are being bought, sold, and smuggled like modern-day slaves." The FBI goes on to say that sex trafficking also facilitates the illegal movement of immigrants across borders, provides a ready source of income for organized crime, and even terrorists. Ethics also go beyond the sex traffickers. The National Human Trafficking Resource Center reminds us that individuals who buy commercial sex provide the demand and profit incentive for traffickers. Many buyers of commercial sex are unaware, ill-informed, or in denial of the abusive realities of commercial sex.
Socioeconomic theory influences sex trafficking of adults because it proposes that there is an underlying relationship between social standing and economic activity. This is illustrated by the fact that every country's role in the sex trafficking industry is directly related to the local and global economic environments, the country's poverty and employment rates, levels of human development, and per capita income. Thus, countries are typically in the exporting role, trafficking women and children out of the country, are more likely to be economically unstable than more affluent destination countries. This affects women particularly, as they are significantly more likely to experience economic vulnerability due to a deficit in sustainable career options and lack of educational opportunities, which becomes more prevalent in economically unstable countries. Although sex trafficking is not a new problem, it has grown exponentially over the last 2 decades and continues to grow each year. As advocates for social justice, it is our duty to protect the most vulnerable populations in our societies. Young adults who experience traumatic events throughout life deserve a helping hand in the holistic healing process to a better life, as well as those middle-aged adults who've experienced poverty and have very little education, trapping them in the cycle of trafficking because of lack of financial means and constant criminalization instead of help. Victims of sex trafficking experience hardship and turmoil most of us couldn't imagine and still find the strength to keep going. It is for this reason alone we should start the road to recovery for our most resilient members of society. As social workers, we must raise awareness of dangers of trafficked and exploited victims and the resources available to them, such as immediate assistance for housing and food, medical care, safety and security, mental health counseling, reconnecting victims with family members, cash assistance and legal status assistance,